The executioner will get his hands on me, and I won't resign. And I won't resign.
All right. Hello, everybody. It is time for Uncontrolled Opposition. I am the engineer and producer, Jayme CheeseSlice. And oh, my light finally came on. I was wondering about that. Just in time. Anyway, how is everybody doing today? We've got a good one for you. We're going to be talking about James B. Wells and his quest for getting information out of the CIA, which is probably a lifetime struggle. And he's got a book about it. We're going to talk about that book. And I think you're going to have and really enjoy it, especially from what we were talking with him in the pre-show. If this is the first time you've ever watched Uncontrolled Opposition here on YouTube and Rumble, and we're also on Kick, just wanted to let you know this is first and foremost a radio program. We're on WBAI and the Progressive Radio Network. And we're going to record for about 55 minutes. And then there will be some editing that is done for the radio program. And that editing is stuff you'll see here on YouTube, but you won't see or you won't hear on the radio program. Anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our hosts, Gloria and Jayme. There you guys are. Welcome.
Hey, Jayme. Hey, Jeremy.
Let's go ahead and bring in our guest. And then I'm going to hand it off to Gloria. Give me a second. I need to bring up the clock so I can make sure we get that time done correctly. Welcome to the show, James. We're going to hand it off to Gloria right now. She's going to do her monologue, and then you're going to be off to the races talking about your story. Let's do it.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Uncontrolled Opposition, where together we battle mind wars with truth strikes. I'm Gloria Guillo, an investigative journalist, and I'm here with my co-host, Professor Jayme Kuzmarov, managing editor of Covert Action magazine. Our producer and engineer is Jayme CheeseSlice. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. This content is intended for informational and educational purposes only and should not be interpreted as professional or legal advice. Listeners are encouraged to form their own opinions. Today we are joined by retired criminology professor and author James B. Wells about his decades-long fight for the truth about his father's death that he details in his book titled Because: A CIA Coverup and a Son's Odyssey to Find the Father He Never Knew. When James was a young boy, his father, U.S. Army Major Jack J. Wells, died in an Air America plane crash in South Vietnam on September 27, 1965. Jack was a senior USAID public safety advisor working on refugee programs and fighting corruption. The official story blamed enemy fire, but key details about that crash have remained classified by the CIA for decades. When James grew up, he discovered hundreds of letters his dad wrote to his mom. The detail in these letters sparked a 33-year investigation he conducted not only through archives, but also through interviews and field visits. He uncovered evidence that his father had blown the whistle on serious corruption in USAID programs. This past April, he and his sisters filed a FOIA request, a FOIA lawsuit against the CIA to force the release of the full records. Consider that James's case is not an anomaly. It's part of a repeated pattern where people connected to CIA operations who challenge wrongdoings or become inconvenient often end up dead under suspicious circumstances, followed by heavy classifications that force families to sue for answers. A prime example is Dr. Frank Olson. He was an Army bioweapon scientist working on programs tied to the CIA. In 1953, the CIA secretly dosed him with LSD without his knowledge as part of the MK Ultra experiments. Days later, he was violently thrown through a closed hotel window in New York and fell to his death. The official story claimed suicide, that Olson jumped. But hey, no one jumps through a closed window to commit suicide, right? His family has always maintained it was obviously murder. A later exhumation revealed a head injury consistent with Olson being knocked unconscious before being thrown out the window. Blunt force head trauma is also described in the CIA's 1953 assassination manual. Our regulars here know we often discuss the manual on our show. The CIA trainers recommended head trauma is done before throwing a target out a window so they don't resist or scream. That's a quote. Perhaps after Olson's autopsy results were made known, future editions now include the logical instruction to open the window first. We can only hope. Folks, you can't make this stuff up. The family sued the CIA, received a settlement and a presidential apology, but continued pushing because they believed the full truth about his sentencing is still being hidden. What crimes was the CIA afraid Frank Olson would reveal? The CIA-run Air America airline lost numerous planes and personnel in Vietnam and Laos. Many affected families allege crashes were covered up or accident reports falsified, forcing them into court for unredacted records, proper benefits, and real answers. Barry Seal, a pilot with reported CIA connections, who turned informant and started exposing drug operations, was gunned down in 1986, shortly after his cover was blown. And Iran-Contra investigative journalist Gary Webb allegedly shot himself in the head twice to accomplish his suicide. And there's investigative journalist Danny Casolaro, who is focused on billions of dollars in money laundering through a backdoor in the Promise software that put George Bush Sr. at its head while he was the sitting president. The autopsy report forwarded the theory that Danny took time to partially remove 3 of his fingernails before slashing both his wrists so many times that he would have lost the mobility to even hold a pencil after the first ones were made. These cases show a clear and disturbing pattern. When individuals raise issues about corruption, wrongdoing, or want to walk away from sensitive programs, mysterious or violent deaths often follow. And then the CIA walls off the details with classification. Families are left with no choice but to file FOIA lawsuits and fight in court for basic truths that all Americans have a right to know. Thank you. James, please tell us in your own words how this unjust and tragic situation unfolded for you and your family. What crimes have you uncovered in your investigation? And what's the latest update on the FOIA request? Thank you.
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking Gloria, Jeremy, and Jayme and WBAI for allowing me to tell my story and my father's story. For those of you who read my book, you'll understand why it's important for my father and I to tell our story about how he lived and how he died. But yeah, as you mentioned in your terrific monologue there, Gloria, when my father was killed on September 27th, 1965, the U.S. State Department told the media and my family that he was the only passenger on a CIA Air America plane shot down by small arms fire. And that's what my family generally believed, although my mother always had her doubts. For 26 years, when I found my father's letters in my mother's bottom dresser drawer in 1991, my mother, my father's death took a tremendous toll on our family. especially my mother, and she suffered from depression and began to suffer from dementia. And my wife and I, my siblings, we decided to move her to live closer to where we lived in a subdivision. And as we're moving her, I discovered over 400 letters in her bottom dresser drawer. These letters begin with those prior to World War II, throughout World War II, post-war Korea, post-war Germany, at the Nuremberg war crimes trials, and both tours in Vietnam. I didn't know the man because he was killed when I was 9, and prior to that, he had been gone on year-long tours. So as any son would do, I began reading the letters and then later studying them. But as I read the letters, I realized my father's a very moral, righteous, religious man, and committed to doing the right thing, obsessed with the truth, and very intolerant of those around him not doing their jobs as they should. And being a criminologist with a PhD in research, I quickly realized his words and actions were that of a whistleblower. So I began, transcribing the letters, scanning them, and some of these letters took months to transcribe because he often wrote with a fountain pen and the ink bled through both sides of the page, and a lot of the letters suffered from mildew and mold damage. And so it took literally years to transcribe all the letters. And almost on a whim, I decided to accompany my wife to Washington, D.C. Part of her duties at the time before she retired was being a lobbyist for the apartment industry, and she would meet with Kentucky congressional representatives every March in D.C. And I realized, hey, the archives in College Park, Maryland is just a metro ride away. I think I'll go with you and see what I can find out. On my very first trip to the National Archives, I found out, looking through declassified, top secret, secret, and confidential files, that the day my father is killed is the same day he's piloting his program to reduce corruption in a program he complained so much to my mother about. So this blew me away. So this really got me excited. I spent 6 weeks at the National Archives, virtually going through all the files in the Office of Public Safety that were there. I also went to 4 other archives in the U.S., including the Vietnam Archives at Texas Tech University, the Air America Archives at University of Texas at Dallas, the Westmoreland Library in San Antonio, and the U.S. Army Archives in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And everywhere I went, I uncovered more and more evidence that contradicted what the government told us about our father's death. And I also made it a point to go to several different Vietnam War military veteran reunions, military advisor reunions, Air America reunions, and even South Vietnamese police reunions of those police who left Vietnam and became refugees and have since settled in the U.S. And I uncovered more evidence that contradicted what the government told us about my father's death. And what's really interesting is, as a professional researcher, I use triangulated research. And if you hear about scientists using triangulation, it's when you use multiple methods to try to prove a point to the best of your abilities. So based upon my father's letters, what he said in those letters, I literally followed clues he left his youngest son to follow in his letters. And based upon my archival research and then my field research, they're all corroborating one another, which led me to write this book, laying out in detail what happened to my father and why. The book was published last Father's Day weekend in 2025. And my wife had been on a book tour from Florida to Maine, and we just got back from Texas from 3 different events there a few weeks ago. And it's really important that my father and I share our story. I filed my first FOIA request with the CIA in 2015. They responded with their reply 2.5 years later, basically denying my FOIA request. And they often cite from Executive Order 13526 that we are authorized to neither deny nor confirm the existence or non-existence of classified documents whose existence or non-existence is still classified. So I appealed, and they then took 8 years to respond to my appeal, and I heard from them April 2025. And they're still continuing to want to release these documents due to privacy concerns, national defense concerns, etc. And mainly what I'm after is the crash investigation report. I know this report exists. I've seen other crash investigation reports that were done at the Air America Archives at University of Texas at Dallas. I actually spent 2 months in Vietnam doing archival research in Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, or as the locals still call it, Saigon, and uncovered documents there that contradicted what we were told, including, and I also saw other crash investigation reports. So I know they exist. And incredibly, in Vietnam, I actually did field interviews with former communist fighters who were very familiar with the crash, and what they told me contradicted what we were told. I actually interviewed the former communist secretary at the time, the leader, who also told us information that contradicted what we were told. They basically said, we don't know why it crashed. We were just as puzzled as anyone else why it went down. And then I actually found the classified crash site and interviewed the elderly Vietnamese couple who saw the undamaged plane fly through the roof of their home, crash and burn, and was immediately surrounded by 3 rings of perimeter security, including South Vietnamese Army and South Vietnamese National Police. But when I filed my last FOIA denial appeal with the CIA, last year, I was expecting to hear from them within 20 days as they are required by law. And I never did hear from them. And that was one reason my siblings and I decided to file a lawsuit. Another reason being my sister, who's the eldest and in frail health, she's had 3 knee replacements, a hip replacement. Every time I talk to her, she says, my dying request is to know what the CIA knows or doesn't know about my daddy's death before I die. She still calls him daddy. I don't know. I don't remember what I called my father. I guess I called him daddy too, but I don't have that knowledge. But basically,
You also have an older brother too.
Yes.
Did he help in the investigation, or?
Well, they've been very supportive,
Okay.
both financially and emotionally. But I've been basically doing this research on my own. I did have some assistance with my university. I was able to get a year-long sabbatical to do archival and field research across the U.S. and Vietnam. So thank you, Eastern Kentucky University. But it's taken a huge toll on our family. Chapter 13 of my book's entitled The Toll, where I talk about this in detail, and it focuses on my wife, Brenda, who's been incredibly supportive. But ever since I found the letters in 1991, she comes into my office when I'm working late at night doing research or writing, and she threatens to leave me. She basically tells me, I'm going to leave you. I'm going to be out of here in the morning. I can't continue to live with you in this obsession. And my wife's very eloquent when she's angry. I wish I could be that eloquent. When I get upset, I stutter and stammer, but she's so eloquent when she's angry. And the time before this happened, when I write about it in the book, she's she gets it all out, and she doesn't leave me. But I remind her, I said, you know what? You're so damn eloquent when you're angry with me. I want to write about this. Next time it happens, I'd like to record you and write about it in the book. Well, 2 weeks before I go to Vietnam, it happens again. And I didn't record her, when it happened. But after she got it all out, I said, let's go down. You remember what I told you last year? What, about recording you? Oh, yeah, let's go downstairs, sit at the kitchen table and rehash this. So I encourage readers to read the book, chapter 13. My wife's so eloquent, and I quote her verbatim. And I can remember some things she says, like, whoever killed your father not only killed him, he also killed you. He killed our family. So, but anyway, the CIA did. When I filed suit this past April, I got probably.
And you filed this with your sister, or you just filed this on your own?
No, because I filed the FOIA complaints. Our attorney said, no, I have to file the lawsuit. I can mention them, but it's James B. Wells versus the CIA. But my siblings are supporting me in this regard. But I want to mention the law firm, Mark Zaid, PC, Professional Corporation. This is the same law firm that's represented several high-profile cases pertaining to whistleblowers and the Havana Syndrome. They defended a whistleblower that led to Trump's first impeachment with the conversation between Zelensky and Trump. So they decided to take on my case, and so I feel very confident that I'm going to get the best representation possible.
Well, a couple questions. One, maybe you can give your theory of what happened based on all that research. But first, maybe you can discuss a little more. I mean, one thing I found very interesting about your book is just to learn more about your father's work in Vietnam with the Office of Public Safety and all the problems that he started to witness. So maybe, and because I myself have been through a lot of those files, because I published a book in 2012 with the University of Massachusetts, a history of American police training programs in the Cold War. And I spent a lot of time also at the College Park archive reviewing the Office of Public Safety files, which was a cover for CIA operations. And of course, there's a lot of secrecy and a lot, to learn about those programs, which, you can learn from books like yours because you're able to trace your father's career. So, and the other thing, first, I think he was also a whistleblower, like in Germany and Korea. He was reporting bad things that were going on there. So maybe touch on that and then discuss, give us some detail about what he was doing in Vietnam and about the bad things he came across.
I'd be glad to. So my father volunteered to join.
I just want to interject one thing. One of the things that I think is very charming about this whole story is that it's neither left or right. I mean, your father was doing things for the military, that he thought was the right thing to do. And then he uncovered all of these things. And this is not from any ideological standpoint. It's just from a good government standpoint.
Right. So my father joined the Army when he was 18. He fought the Japanese in the Philippines, was awarded his first combat infantry badge and a Bronze Star with a V for Valor. Spent some time in post-war Korea, disarming the Japanese after World War II. And then for like 6 years, he was in post-war Germany at the Nuremberg war crimes trials. Both my older siblings were born in Germany. So he's a 21-year-old provost sergeant writing my mother. They're not married yet. They don't get married to 1948. And he's writing her about the prisoners are getting contraband. I have to do an investigation and find out what's going on. And he later writes her, well, I found out 2 of my best friends, a corporal and a sergeant, were selling cigarettes to the prisoners for $10 a carton. I turned them in. They'll probably get 20 years hard labor and a dishonorable discharge. And if I may, I'd like to read a few quotes from his letters I have here in front of him. He's writing my mother, I'm a hated and hunted man, but you could never guess how interesting it is. It is some sort of thrill. You don't have to worry as if you would, but I carry a pistol to bed with me and a weapon with me at all times. And he also writes during this time that he got a broken jaw. In another letter, he says, I would have done the same if they were my brothers. They know better. So let me ask you this. How many 21-year-old soldiers in the military at any point in U.S. history are willing to do something like that and risk the consequences? You know. So even in both of his tours in Vietnam, he writes and confesses to being a whistleblower. So to focus on what Jayme asked me, he did 2 tours. In 1962, John F. Kennedy sent him and a bunch of other military advisors over there to support the Diem regime, which is about to collapse. And we're not supposed to be there. We're violating the Geneva Accords. But he's in the Central Highlands working with special forces. He's a counterinsurgency expert. And his military personnel file reveals he received several awards for helping mobilize the Hmong tribal people, who were our best allies in Vietnam. They continued fighting the war, fighting the communists for 17 years after we abandoned them. But even then, he's writing her about the corruption, and he's complaining about how American aid is distributed disproportionately to the Vietnamese peasants. Diem was a Catholic. And at the time, Vietnam is 10% Catholic, 90% Buddhist. And we're supporting the Diem regime. And the Diem regime doesn't give this aid they're supposed to give to all the peasants. They primarily give it to the Catholic peasants and not the Buddhist. And my father's very critical of that. And then he comes back after he did a year tour in Vietnam, comes back and goes back with USAID as a public safety officer, senior public safety officer. And this is fitting because my father, based upon what my mother told me and his letters revealed, was always more of a humanitarian than a warrior. And so when he was there in 1962, he got to see a little bit about what USAID was doing. They're focusing on humanitarian assistance. So he saw this as his opportunity to pursue his true passion, being a humanitarian, improve public safety, public health, public service. And while he's there, he's, again, being a whistleblower and complaining about the corruption and such he's seen. One thing he's complaining about is the Vietnamese refugee processing program. We give the South Vietnamese government so many dollars per refugee displaced by the war, okay? And here he's writing my mother, we give the Vietnamese officials money, food, etc. for their refugees. They lie and say there's 10,000 when there's only 1,000, and they won't give them the food or money, hoping the refugees will move on. We must take over the issuing of these commodities or the people will never get a damn thing. But here, Betty, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, and the fat-ass Americans do nothing about it because they have no backbone or are afraid to work. But as long as I'll work, I'll call a spade, and no man will get me to write a white paper unless it's the truth. And he adds in a letter, another letter, when he's writing his reports and his superiors are wanting him to lie and change his reports and not mention the corruption and such he's revealing. He writes, I don't give a damn who knows it. I just put it in the monthly report and was asked to take it out. I told them they could take it out, but I don't know if you take it out of the copy of the report I sent you. You should have seen them. So my father had a temper, and he was very intolerant of wrongdoing. Now, in the archives in Saigon, I found out that perhaps the most ruthless province chief throughout the Vietnam War was one of the province chiefs my father interacted with extensively. This province chief was a competent military commander, as Jayme revealed in his review of my book. He was actually awarded a Silver Star by the American Army. He was one of the few highly competent military commanders, but he was also very corrupt. He embezzled U.S. dollars. For example, I found out we gave him $16 million to make a road in his province. And the road was never built, and he forced the contractors to reveal they had been paid, and he pocketed the money. He lied about the number of refugees in his province and kept the money. He had affairs with his officers' wives, and if they complained, he forced them off to high combat areas where they were probably killed. He made his officers bring him teenage Vietnamese virgins most morning. And the people in this province are complaining. They're writing the prime minister and the president, get rid of him. We can't stand him. We're leaving the province. We're taking our daughters with them. They're not safe there. But my father is, he's very critical of this province chief. And even my mother talks to me from the grave. 3 days after my mother died in 2008, I found a note she had written on a piece of paper. When her memory started to fail, she would write little notes and scraps of paper and leave them around the house. But in her box of insurance papers, I found this note. I said, perhaps she left it for me. I don't know. But anyway, she wrote on this note, Jack had written about how furious a certain Vietnamese colonel was at whatever Jack had said to him. I couldn't help but wonder at the time when Jack was shot down if that colonel might have had something to do with it, might have had connections with the Vietnamese communists, somehow been involved. Yet, of course, perhaps not. Well, in the archives in Saigon, I also found out that this same province chief used his officers to assassinate other government officials investigating his corruption. So the last chapter of my book, chapter 25, using, again, triangulated research from my father's letters, my archival research and field research, I resurrect my father's last day, including when he's let out of the taxi cab at the Air American terminal at Tan Son Nhut Airport in Saigon. And I pretty much lay out in detail what happens on that flight from the time he gets on the plane and dies when it crashes.
Can you talk a little bit about what went on in the plane and information about the pilot and things like that?
Sure. So I got a lot of great information at the Air America Archives at the University of Texas at Dallas. I uncovered 6 documents indicating there were 3 passengers on the plane. And perhaps the most important document is from the Air America Flight Information Center, the heart and brains of Air America operations in Vietnam, indicating there was a captain, a training captain or co-pilot, plus 3 passengers. So this was very revealing information to me. I then made it a point to go to the Air America reunion, and I met with and corresponded with several Air America pilots and personnel. One was Jake Werrell, who was the Air America chief pilot at the time. And when I approached him and told him who I was and who my father was and about this plane, he tells me this was the most mysterious, covered up crash of the war. We weren't told anything. Normally, we would want to know all the details about the crash. We'd want to fly over the crash site and pay our respects. We'd like to review the crash investigation report to review what happened to avoid, any possible other further similar incidents. We were kept in the dark. We weren't told anything. And then at the archives in Saigon, I uncovered documents indicating that these 2 extra passengers were unauthorized. Also, through my attendance at military Vietnam War veteran reunions, military advisory reunions and such, I spoke with 3 different people from 3 different agencies who reported there was evidence of a gun battle within the plane. The plane wreckage indicated bullet holes in the seats. So the plane was a C-45 Twin Beach, and it's an aluminum skinned aircraft. So the plane burned up entirely, but the seats were made of aluminum, and the upholstery had burned off the seats, but they still indicated bullet holes within the seat backs. One of the flight managers told me that there was reportedly evidence that the pilot had been shot in the head. So what I lay out in the book in
So
chapter,
I just want to say it's a little hard to fly a plane in the middle of a gun battle, especially when the pilot takes a bullet in the head.
Right.
So this is kind of consistent with some of the other things that we've seen where, alleged suicide is 2 bullets in the head, or somebody rips their fingernails off before they slice their wrists, and somebody knocks themselves unconscious and then throws themselves through a glass window. So
Right.
yeah, this is up there.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah. And
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, what's fascinating is I spoke with everybody, all surviving Air America personnel who were in Vietnam at the time that had any knowledge of the crash at all. I actually tracked down Frank Bonansinga before he passed away, and this was one of the most widely known and popular Air America pilots. And when I talked to him on the phone, he was actually in the air at the time, and he heard the distress call from the pilot. Keep in mind, the plane's while it's landing at this airstrip, this small airstrip, is when all this takes place. And Frank told me that he heard in the distress call something about gunfire. And when I told Jake Werrell, the chief pilot of Air America, what Frank said, he said, "What? This is the most valid thing you've told me yet." He said, when we were in Vietnam and we're getting ground fire, we would all say, we're taking hits. We're taking hits. We would have never mentioned gunfire. To me, that mention of gunfire indicates there was a gun battle on the plane. So everything, again, I'm a researcher. And so in my book, I use real names. I got personal depiction releases from everyone. I cite all my sources. I cite all my archival documents, whether they're in French, Vietnamese, or English. I cite all my interviews. So it's all there for the reader to make up their mind, okay? But I lay a pretty convincing, theory about what happened to my father and why. In fact, if I could take a moment, I have like a minor and major theory about what happened. One minor theory, and again, I've talked with former CIA and State Department personnel, and they think one reason the CIA won't release this after 60 years is they're embarrassed about what they know or don't know about the crash. Okay. So, and again, I may know more than CIA knows because they weren't in a position to interview communist fighters or the former Communist Party secretary like I did. Okay, they weren't in a position to do that in 1965. So that's one theory. Another theory that I take more credence in is that throughout U.S. military history, especially in wars post-Vietnam, what do? We embrace competent military commanders despite their history, despite their corruption, because they're competent. They're the most valuable military resources available at the time. So one theory I have is that this province chief, who was a competent military commander, was involved, had one of his officers on the plane to dispense with my father. I suspect it wasn't supposed to happen during the flight, but perhaps right after the flight. And this knowledge, the CIA is aware of, that this province chief was involved. And because he was a competent military commander, the CIA decided that we need this gentleman, and so we'll just cover us, crash up, and not reveal what we know, so that we can continue to rely on this competent military commander. This military commander was finally relieved of command in 1968. The U.S. government, the State Department, got fed up with all this corruption and crimes and such, and he was relieved of command. I think he only did 30 days in jail, Vietnamese jail, and he got out before Saigon fell, I suspect with millions, and settled in San Jose, California. He died in 1993.
There's a couple questions I have. One is, there's I think you recounted a meeting. This may have been right before the crash with his supervisor, John Kessler.
Right.
And he was telling him to, revise the reports and basically cover up everything he was reporting. And I think your father was refusing. So that conflict, and that would possibly point to the U.S.
right
involved. If you want to say something about that, and I have one other question.
Yeah. As Jayme, as you reveal in your book, which I cite, Modernizing Repression, the Office of Public Safety, perhaps the major reason it was created was so that the CIA could have its agents and officers within the State Department. I have no evidence to indicate my father was CIA, but I know many of his colleagues were CIA. I lost my train of thought, Jayme. Refresh my memory.
Well, it's this meeting. Yeah, that's
right. Okay.
The meeting with this guy Kessler. Yeah. See, we don't know, and that was my other question about some other suspicious deaths within the OPS, like this guy Jack Ryan. Maybe you can talk about. But first, maybe this meeting, he had with Kessler, where Kessler was telling him to change the reports, where he was actually reporting and making some recommendations, I think, about the refugee programs and the foreign aid, and he was reporting on some of the corruption, and Kessler told him to take that out of his report and threatened him, I think.
Right. My father revealed that in one of his letters to my mother. So, I suspect Kessler was under pressure too. Byron Engel, who is head of Office of Public Safety, was former OSS, former CIA. And, they're trying to keep things under wraps. So I suspect that was one factor there, as well as to why my father might have been retaliated, because he was a loose cannon in many regards in terms of revealing corruption and such that the Office of Public Safety didn't want out. And as my father writes my mother in July of 1965, he's writing her about how one of his colleagues, Richard Kimball, killed their boss, Jack Ryan, who is also former OSS and CIA, but he's actually the chief public safety officer in all of Vietnam. And it was reportedly over a love triangle where Kimball had a mistress, and she decided to shack up with Jack because, more money or whatever, more luxuries available or whatever. But, and again, keep in mind that all these, most of these public safety officers are married, and they're going on year-long tours. And I want to point out that John Kessler mentioned that my father was one of the few advisors who refused a Vietnamese mistress. Kessler referred to these beautiful teenage, female mistresses, most of the advisors and a lot of the military, high brass had as long-haired dictionaries, because they would accompany their American boyfriends literally 24 hours a day to serve as an interpreter, as well as to serve their other needs. This was a real problem. So I think it was another reason why it needed to be covered up.
Yeah, and Ryan, well, there's another book by Dan Sullivan, I think is the author, because Ryan may have been like your father, who was also starting to report on the corruption, and his wife didn't believe for a minute that this mistress story was the reason they killed him, and that his wife, Ryan's wife, also felt he was murdered, and to keep him quiet, and then the CIA covered this up. And then Kimball, he was clearly the murderer, but he got no punishment. Like, they just allowed him to go back to the States. And then he was set up with a very good job in the United States. And he got, I think he was working for some companies that did work with the military, and he got a security clearance, even though he was a murderer. So that breeds suspicion. There's some kind of cover up, and they're protecting Kimball, the killer, because he silenced another whistleblower like your father, Ryan.
Yeah. I studied those files, an Office of Public Safety files in College Park, Maryland, in detail. I looked through all the court testimony and such, and incredibly, Kimball should have been found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in a Vietnamese prison, which is horrible. But the U.S. waived jurisdiction, which is rarely done with American diplomats and such. And a tribunal of 3 Vietnamese judges found him guilty of killing his mistress, but not Jack Ryan. And instead of giving him a life sentence, he got 1 year. And incredibly, I'm reading declassified documents indicating that the day after he's sentenced to this prison for 1 year, he's released on his own recognizance to do whatever he wants to, including going to USAID headquarters and making phone calls and such. And then after 1 year in prison, he's released by the Prime Minister and goes back to the States. So this was a huge embarrassment to Office of Public Safety and USAID, and you don't see much reporting on it in the newspapers about this at all.
Well, one thing I'd kind of like to kind of raise the vibrational level here is your dad. Okay, he had extraordinary integrity, and then to deliver on that integrity, he had courage and bravery. What do you think gave him that strength? Because it's so important that we grow more people like that, especially young people, that we support them in these in developing these character traits, which are so important.
Well, what's incredible is he exhibited this even as a teenager. I talk about that in the book, where he assaults a teacher in his high school for making fun of his girlfriend. And then, even as a 21-year-old provost sergeant, revealing these war crimes. So I really can't explain where he got that from at an early age.
How about your grandparents? Did you know your grandparents?
Well, yeah, my grandfather was a World War I veteran who was suffered from mustard gas and was subjected to intense artillery bombardments and such, and he had a bad temper. And my book lays out when my father and my grandfather get in an argument and a fight, and my father runs away from home at the age of 16, never to return, because. Wow. My grandfather's cardinal rule was he had 3 boys, 3 girls, and he told his boys, if you ever strike me, you're out of here. And my aunt recounted the story. They're putting hay in the hayloft, and they're hot and sweaty and dirty, and one kind of bumps into the other one, the other one shoves the other one, and my grandfather shoves back, and my father, knocks out my grandfather in the hayloft. Wow. And he runs away from home, and my grandfather really didn't want him to leave. But my father said, I broke Dad's cardinal rule. I got to do what's right. And so he ran away from home, became a welder in Columbus, Ohio, working for the defense industry. He didn't have to go to the Army, but he did. And he actually made really good money, more money than his grandfather working at the steel mill. But I think one reason why my father was such an honest man with integrity was
And fearless and brave.
Yeah. We were all raised Episcopalians, and again, this book takes on an unattended spiritual theme. I didn't plan on it to, but because of all the miracles we experienced in Vietnam, it does. But Episcopalians, we've been leaders in truth and social justice and doing the right thing, defending those who can't defend themselves, especially the marginalized, the poor, the sick, the refugee. I remember my mother hosting Vietnamese and Cambodian families, helping them get acclimated to the U.S. and such. So when you read my book, you also read some of my father's letters where he talks about his faith and how the Episcopal Church has been instrumental in guiding him and such. So that has something to do with it, but that doesn't explain why he was such a moral, honest man before he got involved in the Episcopal Church. He didn't get involved in the Episcopal Church till he was in the Army years later. So, it's really incredible.
How about your grandma on your dad's side?
She I didn't really get a chance to know her. She was a diabetic and died when I was like 6, but I suspect they were all raised Southern Baptists in Ohio. And both my father and my grandfather were strict disciplinarians. In some regards, I feared my father. He would let me know, hey, before I come home, you better make sure your room's cleaned up, but hopefully I've answered that question for you.
So it's a sense of faith. It's a sense of believing in that what we're experiencing in our present life is one part of existence, that there's something bigger and greater than ourselves, and that all our activities are an offering to that greater good. And
I'm glad you mentioned that, Gloria, because as I mentioned, my book takes on an unattended spiritual theme. Because when I'm in Vietnam, the Vietnamese practice ancestral worship, and they believe that the Vietnamese, there's a symbiotic relationship between the Vietnamese living and the dead. How you live your life here, you do good things, you live a good life, and that improves your ancestors' afterlives, and your deceased loved ones will guide you and help you achieve even a better life on this earth. And I'm in Vietnam witnessing this, and I realized, wow, the relationship I have with my father is very similar to this. My father and I also have a symbiotic relationship. I'm following clues in the letters he left me, corroborating what he said and contradicting what the government told us. And in return, my father's resurrecting me, helping me achieve peace with what I know about his death and what I may never know. So it's really incredible. And again, keep in mind, perhaps the greatest miracle of all I mentioned in this book is that we believed what the government told us till I found these letters. And it was these letters that have revealed the CIA cover-up and government lie.
wow, where are we on time? I think we're getting close there. Yeah.
Well, there's one other case. Yeah, I mean,
Go ahead, Jayme.
as far as the pattern, yeah, I mean, this has been a great discussion, and it's, I think, important story for everybody to know on many different levels. And I mean, one is just the corruption of the U.S. government and agencies like the CIA, and that they will kill their own, I think you point to another case. After reading your book, it led me to read a couple other books, like this book on Jack Ryan by Dan Sullivan, which I hadn't known about because it was self-published. Yeah, because these kind of books don't get a lot of exposure. You don't see them reviewed in the New York Times, so you don't know about them until. But the other was the case of Jerry Rose, and then I went back and he wrote a book, and this was a brilliant young journalist who was actually really traveling around the countryside and recording the feeling of the Vietnamese peasants and people, and pointing to the rottenness of the U.S. policy, and that many were supporting the National Liberation Front. They wanted the U.S. out of Vietnam. And this is in like the 50s. This is when when your father was there, before the huge, U.S. Military invasion, where it was still a kind of quiet war with just special forces and these covert operators. And this guy Jerry Rose was a brilliant young reporter, and then he was killed under very suspicious circumstances. And it looks like he was murdered too. I don't know if you want to mention his case.
Yeah. I actually got to speak with his daughter multiple times, Lucy Rose, and she co-wrote that last book about Jerry Rose, and she had me write a testimonial for the book. But some of the people I spoke with, and I talk about this in my book, talked about how Jerry Rose was actually working with USAID at the time, and was also trying to expose corruption in this refugee processing program, and was on a jet airliner traveling with a contingent of other officials. And the plane mysteriously crashed. This occurred 11 days, I think, before my father's death. Now, an investigation, a formal investigation was done, and I think it ruled out sabotage or whatever. But then again, there's lots of evidence to suggest that no, it was suspicious in nature and such. But yeah, that is more than coincidental, I think, at the time.
Yeah, and these are really great people. Unfortunately, we find that pattern where the whistleblower, the truth tellers, the good people are the ones, killed by the evil people who cover it up.
Sad but true.
Yeah.
By the way, I want to mention that I'm very much involved in the whistleblowing community. I post a whistleblowing fact on Twitter or X every day. But my father and I are going to be honored on July 30th on Capitol Hill on National Whistleblower Appreciation Day. So my wife and I are going to be there. So we're really looking forward to that event.
Oh, great.
That's fantastic.
That's great. Yeah,
Jeremy and I have done some whistleblower events.
Yeah,
Jeremy did the last one
actually,
himself.
Last year I went on Capitol Hill. There was Senator Ron Wyden and Chuck Grassley. Two congressmen who have done a lot to support whistleblowers, although sometimes it's partisan. Each party celebrates the other party, whistleblowers from the other party. But your case is not partisan. So generally, I think they have done some good work, Grassley and Wyden. And yeah, last year I was at that event because Covert Action on Capitol Hill, because Covert Action has covered whistleblowers. And then we was invited by a guy, Bradley Birkenfeld, who's a whistleblower in the banking industry. He was on last year, so it's a nice event. Yeah, and so,
good. Yeah, it's nice that you did that.
Well, in closing, James, please tell our audience how they can purchase your book and follow your work.
Okay, I encourage people to go to my website, jamesbwells.com. You can read all sorts of information about me. The book's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. I do encourage you to seek out your local independent bookstore and have them order the book. They can get it in less than a week, probably. If you want a signed personal copy, you can request that from me at my website, jamesbwells.com. And I love talking and corresponding with people, so don't hesitate to reach out to me. We've been on this book tour, and I love talking with people, and especially veterans and such. And, my story resonates with a lot of people. A lot of people have unresolvable questions, and how do you find peace with that? So I enjoy sharing my story with others.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure and honor to have you here with us. And I just have to read our outro. The opinions you hear are ours and that of our guest, not those of WBAI, the Pacifica Foundation, or the Progressive Radio Network. That wraps up our show for today. This is Uncontrolled Opposition. I'm Gloria Guillo, joined here by Professor Jayme Kuzmarov. Remember to like and share our broadcast. Your kind support keeps us going. Please find us on Substack, Twitter, X, and Podbeam. Thanks for tuning in. Hope to see you next week. Now, we're not recording for WBAI, but we're still live. So if you want to discuss anything for a few moments afterwards, this is a good time to do it, but we're still live. So, as we say, don't take your pants off.
Yeah.
I do have a quick question. You said there's a whistleblower conference, and is it going to be on Capitol Hill again this year? And if
Yeah,
so,
every
what's-
every July 30th is National Whistleblowing Appreciation Day. So
Okay.
they have this event on Capitol Hill. Jayme, I may follow up with you in an email to ask more about this event. I just know I've been invited
Nice.
and confirmed. I understand it's hard to get tickets. I guess it's limited capacity and such. But
Well, I think that last year I went to the, it was like a luncheon, and then they honored different whistleblowers, and Senator Wyden spoke, and Senator Grassley. I think there was a more fancy dinner. I wasn't invited to that. I just went to the luncheon, but it was a nice event. Yeah, there were different whistleblowers, and that were being honored, and interesting people to meet there. So,
yeah.
and some of the speeches were very good. Yeah. One guy had written a book about the history of whistleblowers going back to the American Revolution, and he was one of the speakers. And then I got his book, which was very interesting. So,
Yeah, Jayme, I encourage you to get on Twitter or X. There's a whole whistleblowing community, and that's how I became aware of a lot of whistleblowers and those supporting whistleblowers. Jane Turner, FBI whistleblower, she now runs Whistleblower Network News. Cone and Calapinto, they're a law firm that specializes in representing whistleblowers. I frequently correspond with David. He wrote a great David Calapinto wrote a great testimonial for my book. I know Mark Zaid, the law firm representing me in my lawsuit, he posts frequently on Twitter and X. There's just dozens and dozens of people there who support whistleblowing. And again, it's incredible that my father was a whistleblower decades before Daniel Ellsberg was a whistleblower. And we can attribute the whistleblowing becoming a positive thing and not a negative thing. These whistleblowers used to be regarded as snitches, but Ralph Nader at a conference in 1972 was the one who kind of turned things around to talk about whistleblowers in a positive light. So I find it incredible that my father was a whistleblower in the 40s, and it's 3 decades later before the term actually became more popular and widely known.
yeah. And one other point I would make, as far as recommending your book, James, I think it is important historical. What it uncovers about your father's work in South Vietnam is important just in understanding the U.S. role in Vietnam in that era, and also his criticism, because we've had a show about this, and I have an article coming out in September on this very bad historical revisionism, I think in part driven by the CIA. They're teaching a phony history of the Vietnam War. They're trying to sanitize that history. And James, our friend James Bradley, is very important in telling the true history of the Vietnam War, that they're sanitizing on the college campuses today. And there's this wave of revisionist historian that present Diem as this great leader. And reading your book, shows the corruption and the favoritism of Catholic. I think the point your father was pointing out in his letters about how all the aid was being geared toward the Catholics, and that's what if we want to understand why the Vietnam War escalated and what went wrong, that Diem alienated a huge percentage of the population by favoring the Catholics, which was only about, I think, 5%, right, of the South Vietnamese population. So if he's channeling all the aid to them and favoring them, he angered the Buddhists, and that's what led. And then he started attacking the Buddhists when they staged protests, and then they ended up burning themselves to death to protest further. And he was carrying out waves of violence against any opposition. And that's what ultimately led to the escalation of the Vietnam War. So it's important to learn that history. And unfortunately, there's a lot of false history being promoted today, I think driven by the same corrupt agency that killed your father. So that's why reading books like that, your book, is important to understand the history, and it's a valuable primary source. I mean, those letters are primary source documents, And that's how historians can learn, because I'm trained as a professional historian, and tell this, and that's how I learned to piece together the history. You have to look at the primary source documents, what people were reporting, saying at the time. So it's very valuable historical work that hopefully more people will read, including Steve.
And I think in James's case, he doesn't only just take that, but he corroborates it with interviews and site visits and
as far as the crash,
there's a whole,
but leathers as far as what was going on in Vietnam at that time, and then the Jerry Rose, his book, which you can get, because this guy Rose, who died under these suspicious circumstance, had done some very valuable field reporting where he was going out in the villages, and none of the report, I think he talked about it, that most of the reporters would just sit in the hotel in Saigon, and they were having fancy parties and play tennis in the afternoon, and they weren't doing real reporting. He went out into these remote rural areas and talked to the villagers and got a much better understanding of what was going on and what was their attitude and what was going wrong in the country and why they were leaning to support for the revolutionary movement. And he published a book that's a very valuable book. I think it was published posthumously because he was murdered, or seems to have been murdered. But anyway, that's another good primary source, his reporting. So from that era, the 50s, early 60s, and that set the groundwork for the disaster that unfolded in later years.
Yeah, something you said, Jeremy, reminds me of a letter my father wrote. Like Rose, my father, unlike all his colleagues in the Office of Public Safety, who would make one visit per week to their province, make a day visit, and come back to Saigon so they could sleep in their air-conditioned apartments. My father didn't do that. He worked 7 days a week and would come to Saigon like on a Saturday afternoon to take a hot bath. He literally washed up with a bucket of water while he's sleeping in these provincial or district police departments, subjected to the same dangers these policemen are. But I love what my father wrote here to my mother. I could eat and sleep with the American military, but I don't feel I should. Never did think they should, like separate. Still don't know how in the hell you can know what people are doing, how they are living if you don't do it with them. I am sure what I say is correct. I can do so much more than most Americans. I try to be a part of the people. Even the VC know I am for the people, I hope. So how many Americans are saying that at that time?
Wow.
He loved the people, but hated their government. And so what upsets me really about how we continue to make the same mistakes, in Iraq, Afghanistan, what do? We hole up in our forts, the green zones, where we don't interact with the people, and that just raises more suspicion and such. And you can't fight a war like that. You got to get out and interact with the people. You can't look at them through 3-inch glass of a M1 Abrams tank or whatever. And my father.
Now it's even worse. They just fly a drone over, an unmanned drone, and just bomb the hell out of stuff from a computer screen somewhere way off any battlefield.
Yeah, we ignore the lessons of history so much. Had we simply looked at the history books, we would have realized the Vietnamese have defeated every invader for thousands of years. The Chinese dynasty, the Mongol horde, the French, the Japanese. Nobody can whip them. It's crazy.
Well,
Okay,
I have to run.
Yeah.
This has been a great show. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
Thank you again, James. It's been inspiring.
And it's incredible work you've done. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Now, will this be viewable on Twitter?
I'm going to post it now right after the show, so I'll send it to you, and you can promote it on social media and stuff.
Awesome. I'll do that. And I'll also mention your review of the book. I haven't had a chance to do that yet. That's
great. Yeah, I'll put a link to that with the because we have a Substack, and then I post every week our shows And then it's going to air next week on WBAI
On
and
Tuesday.
Radio
And-
Network. So
Yeah,
Very
also
good.
on Tuesday.
And
Well,
the
thank you.
podcast version's more concise, and so it's always the same length too. So for people who like that consistency,
Yeah. Well, this has been great. I really
Yeah.
appreciate it. And thank you all so much for helping share my father's story.
yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. Also, thanks to Craig Pasta Jardula for being executive producer for Uncontrolled Opposition, and thanks to the audience who's watching this at home. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and hope you'll be back next week for our next episode. Next week is going to be our 50th episode of Uncontrolled Opposition since we
Wow.
changed the name.
Jeez.
So, yeah, time flies. and
Jeez.
It's been almost a year.
What do we have next week?
So-
Let's see.
Okay.
Next week is this is a good one. This is going to be on Timothy Leary
Oh,
and
that'll
the CIA and the counterculture. It should be a lot of fun, this show too.
be- all right. Well, stick around. Be back here next week for that one, and we're just going to wrap it up and get out of here. Thanks for watching. Everybody have a great weekend, and
Thank you. Bye.
keep finding supporting those whistleblowers out there.
There you go. Thank you, Jayme.
God bless
All
you.
right. Take care.
See you.
Don't want to offend. Let us pretend. System is just. Don't abandon your trust. You've invested too much. It's all outrage. Won't you step in your parade? Your fascist regime is insane. Repression on selection day. FBI. And the NRA brigade. Too much. Where what do